Bronx, and welcome to In the Margins. Today, I'm so pleased to have as our guest Dr. Susan Burns, president of the University of Mount St. Vincent in the Bronx, New York City. Dr. Burns, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to
Thank
In the
you for having
Margins.
me. Thank you. I'm so looking forward to our conversation.
As I looked at your bio and some of your background, of course, what um, stuck out to me and will stick out to many of our listeners and viewers is the fact that you are a first generation college graduate. And of course, when there is a first generation college graduate who becomes a university president, you know, there's a unique kind of background experience, perception of what it takes to make it that such an individual brings. So I was wondering if you talk first of all about your own higher education journey and how you made it being first generation.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is a journey as a first generation college student, college graduate, and what I say to my students, and many of them are first generation at the University of Mount St. Vincent, what I say to them is that each of our journeys is unique to us, but there are things that as first gen students and graduates that we share in common. And so my father had some college, did not complete a degree, and my mother did not go to college. And I am one of four girls. And from the early days of what I remember as a child, they always very much emphasized that education is important. It wasn't something that they necessarily had access to or resources for, but they said, you girls have to figure this out and, we'll support you in the ways that we can, but, you're going to get some kind of degree. And for each one of my sisters and I, we took a slightly different paths, but all of us had some kind of formal secondary education. And my path, very similar to our students, started with, okay, I know I'm going to go to college. What does that mean? And where can I go and where can I afford to go? And so when I started looking for colleges, like many students, I had this kind of wild array of colleges that I wanted to consider. And then I started clicking through saying, well, I don't think I can afford that. I don't think I can afford that. That school is too far away, or that school's too close. And so I started narrowing my list and really kind of landed on a public institution of higher education because I did not have anyone saying to me, like we say to our students, an independent, private, religious affiliated education is not out of reach for a student who may be first in their family to go to college. And I was very fortunate in that I landed at a mid-sized public university and really was a good student, but I was not a great advisee because I knew what I wanted to do. And I would show up to my advisor. We had professional advisors at that institution. And I'd say, hey, I'm going to take these classes. And the advisor was like, you're a smart kid. Sure, go ahead and take those classes. And because of that, I ended up taking all of my major courses before I took my general education courses, which I do not advise, do not advise. And I also was very much interested in finishing quickly because I was looking to save money and I knew I would have graduate education in my future as well. And so I did my degree in 3 years and I missed out, honestly, missed out on a lot of different kind of experiences that really are so valuable. I mean, obviously it worked out for me in the end, but it was such an adventure that I really didn't have the community with me, walking with me, saying, hey, might just slow down just a little bit and consider joining these other organizations or getting involved in student government or think about studying abroad or doing different kinds of experiences to enrich the experience of the college degree. And so when I have the opportunity to speak to first generation college students, I say, please make the most of this. It's not just about clicking classes off a list to get to that degree as quickly as possible. It is about really making the most of the educational experience and really understanding that it is a holistic experience, not just class content that creates this opportunity for you in the future as well. And so I feel the students, I feel the families concern when they think about, okay, is my son or daughter, my student going to be successful? They're taking a big risk. There's a lot of pressure on that student because parents or family members are expecting them to do well because, a lot's riding on the student's education. I've been there. I've experienced that.
Of course, in your own journey, and so many of us who have gone through higher education, cost, is a major factor, right?
Mhm.
Can I afford to pay for school? Can I afford to stay
Mhm.
in school? We have, students, of course, are doing a lot of stop outs,
Mhm.
even with COVID and this, recent economic crisis. It has a lot of people really questioning the value proposition of a college education, but probably more specifically, a liberal arts
Mhm.
education. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this issue of higher ed costs, right? And as during your tenure at the Mount, what have you done around making the Mount accessible and perhaps affordable to those who are most underprivileged among your population of students?
Yeah. And again, I experienced that as a first gen student myself. And although my family background is a little bit different than many of the students who come to the Mount, my parents said to me, we can't afford this degree by ourselves. We're expecting you to be a contributor to this experience. And so I was working at one point in time, three different jobs, two on campus, one off campus, to make sure that I could afford to continue to re-register, not just to get there, but to continue to persist in it as well. So I very much feel that pressure, and understand that pressure that the majority of our students do work to make sure that their experience is something that they can continue from semester to semester. University of Mount St. Vincent has this long, rich history of providing excellent education to those who may not being served well by others. And so we were founded more than 175 years ago by the Sisters of Charity of New York as first an academy for girls, because there weren't many educational experiences for girls back more than 175 years ago. And then we were the first institution of higher learning for women in the state of New York. So since our founding, we've been asking, how can we make higher education accessible to those who deserve to have access to it? So in our DNA at the university, we have really asked that question over the many years we've existed. Now, what does that look like today? So for our traditional undergraduate students, 100% of them receive some kind of institutional aid. We are very generous in the institutional aid that we offer. And so we often talk about, especially for first generation families, the importance of not just first looking at the sticker price and saying, oh my gosh, I can't afford it. I would have, as a first gen student, said, well, I can't afford that. How can I go to that institution? I'd love to go there. We say it's about having a conversation. How have you performed in your high school experience? There very likely are going to be merit scholarships. We have need-based scholarships available for students. Over the past few years, on average, we've been awarding about $40 million annually in institutional aid and grants. And so we really work very hard to make finances not a barrier for our students. And then we work with students when they get here to make sure that they're taking advantage of work study, whether they are qualified federally for work study or not. We have many on-campus jobs, and we don't ask the question, are you qualified for federal work study? We say we have student employment. And if there are federal funds that back that, great. There's institutional funds that back that as well. So for the traditional undergraduate population, we really want them to see themselves not just getting here, but persisting here and not letting finances be a barrier. And we also say to students, if something in your life changes and your family situation changes, we have an appeal process for reconsideration for you to be considered for additional funding as well. The Mount also has this phenomenal scholarship program. We have lots of different scholarships, but this scholarship program that's called the Mott Street Scholars for students who have persisted through homelessness or foster care. When they come to the Mount becomes their home. And that scholarship program covers tuition, room, board, fees, laptop, books, insurance, covers the holistic experience for students to give them the opportunity, again, to change their trajectory. And these students have the ability, they just don't have the resources. And the reason why it's a fantastic story, the reason why it's called the Mott Street Scholarships is when the sisters first came from Maryland to New York, their first ministry was an orphanage at the corner of Mott and Prince Streets in New York City, which is now in Chinatown. But they had an orphanage. And so back to our founding, we say, how can we support those who deserve to have access to an excellent educational experience? More recently, I'm so excited to share that this fall semester, we launched our associate degree program for students who have the highest financial need and also do not meet our admissions criteria. So these are students who would likely either not go to college or they might end up in a community college, which I'm a huge fan of community colleges, but they might not have the same kind of supports and resources and um, kind of holistic advising experience that helps them not get lost in the system. So the tuition for our associate degree program, which is called Seton College at the University of Mount St. Vincent, is set at what the students get for state and federal aid. So this is not costing them financially. It's costing them in terms of their investment of time, energy, academic study, and so forth, but they're not paying out of pocket to get their associate degree. And so they're taking no loans in their first 2 years. And in addition to putting this at a very affordable price, they also are given a laptop. And while they're on campus, they get breakfast and lunch at no cost to them. And we've given them access to dedicated faculty who know that these students are taking a chance on themselves. We know that they may or may not have the family support to be there. We know that they may need a little bit of help to kind of remove some of those life barriers that can derail them from seeking their education and continuing their education. And so our mission, our values are about asking how can we make sure that there's affordable, accessible access to this excellent education that we provide.
Yes. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of wraparound support for students. Of course, it's not just finances that are a barrier. We have a lot of students that it's childcare, right? How am I going to be able to stay in school if I don't have childcare, right? Is it food assistance? Is it social services? I was struck by the fact that you even offer social worker because the reality is, as you know, as you've seen, the barriers to higher education persistence, let's say completion, often are a lot of these life circumstances that go beyond a scholarship, of course, which is essential. So I was wondering if you could talk about what you have seen with regards to these wraparound services. I think that the model that you are operating with is from the Come to Believe network. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of these wraparound services that go beyond finances. How important are these services when it comes to actually completion for the students you serve?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because too often we don't talk about it. Too often we focus on how we're getting them here, how do we make sure that it's affordable when they get here, and we don't talk about those life circumstances that really are significant. Like by ignoring them, it doesn't make it go away. So I appreciate the question tremendously. So for our 4-year traditional undergraduate students, every student who enters the University of Mount St. Vincent gets 2 people who are going to walk with them in their journey. They get a professional advisor and they get a faculty advisor. And that first year faculty advisor is a professor who teaches a first year experience course for them. That is really a course that is like, how do you navigate this whole kind of higher education experience? And we assume whether you're first generation or you're not first generation, there's a lot of jargon in higher education. So you may not know that language. And so it's an opportunity to teach them how do you navigate this system that is called higher education? And then also, how do you really get plugged in, engaged, and involved as a student at the University of Mount St. Vincent? And so those faculty advisors are really great entry mentors to those students. And they actually have a peer mentor who's associated with those courses as well to help those students see a peer as somebody who's going to help them kind of navigate the systems within the university as well. Those professional advisors, the reason why they're very important and they're doing a much better job than the professional advisor that I had as a student back in the day, is that they are the people that they can go to, not just to select classes, but to say, you know what? I have a hold on my account. I don't know what that's about. Who do I need to talk to? And that person doesn't just say, oh, you need to go talk to the bursar. What the heck is a bursar? They don't just say, oh, that's a residence hall hold. They point them to the specific people they need to have a conversation with. And then they're there as a resource to help them navigate that experience. Those professional advisors also are people who are kind of the outside of the class monitoring what's going on with these students. If one of their students or advisees comes into their office and says, you know what, I'm having roommate issues. I just don't know what I'm going to do. They listen. They don't just say, "Oh, you got to go talk to Residence Life." They listen, and we have a software system that's fantastic that allows us to kind of raise flags to say, you know what, Susan needs a little bit more help in this area, or can you follow up with Susan on this particular topic or question, or I'm referring Susan to this particular office. And so we are a high touch institution to make sure our students have access to all of these different supports. Because we had these kinds of systems and structures in place, we actually, when we developed our associate degree program, and you mentioned the Come to Believe Network, which is our partner who helped us really very thoughtfully design the associate degree program, because it is an organization that has worked with other colleges, universities to develop certain kind of designed programs, first developed at Loyola University in Chicago under the name Arupe College. What the design is about is providing students with what I call intrusive holistic support. So these students, again, have dedicated faculty members who know that we're not teaching you remedial classes. These are the same level classes that are going to keep you on path to completing your degree as any other incoming first year student or second year student. These are classes, though, that we understand you might need a little bit more support. And so we're going to make sure that you have access to us faculty in the same ways that our other students have access to their faculty, but then a little bit more. They also have dedicated social work support beyond our counseling center. So the counseling center is something that I'm very proud to say we don't have wait lists for. Our counselors are fabulous. Our students are seen at a high rate if they need it. And so we've got those services available. The social work support that students in Seton College experience is more about community health and advocacy. And so if a student says, and we actually had a situation like this, a sad situation last semester, a student's parent passed away, and it was a single parent household. And the student was in a situation of, I don't think I can afford the rent to the place where my parent and I were living. What am I supposed to do? So that social work support is about how do we connect you to the right resources to help address those life issues that can, again, derail you from degree completion. The other supports that we provide for our Seton College students, we have a very specific to them, career advisor who is making connections with employee partners who understand these students need to be students first and understand that these students are very likely going to have to work. And so, yes, we offer on-campus employment for these students, but also we know that the way that their classes are set up, they're on campus 3 days a week. So those other days that they have to work, we want to make sure those employers are not just taking advantage of them as employees, that they actually are, one, giving educational experiences as a part of their employment, and two, paying them a decent wage, and three, understand that they do need to study. And so how can we be partners together in supporting their education as well? And then the final thing I would say that we are doing that I think is about, again, not only attracting students to the Mount, but retaining the students and giving them the vision of what's possible. For the students in the associate degree program, we also offer to them at no cost the experience of taking some professional certificates as well. And so we understand that these students may not be convinced that an associate degree is going to be the thing that gets them to wherever they want to be. So we set them up so they can continue on the four-year institution. They could transfer if they wanted to, but they can also stop and have a job and have a story to tell. I've done an associate degree with a certificate from Google. I've done an associate degree with a certificate in project management to give them a story to tell. And I think that's part of how do you wrap around support them is help them imagine the possibilities as well.
Now you mentioned this whole concept. Well, I've heard it in other places of intrusive counseling. Meaning it's funny. I did a interview with somebody at Morehouse College. Morehouse College
Mhm.
was serving all African American males, and they talked
Yes.
about, hey, we understand coming in that many of our students will need support whether they realize it or not, right? And
Yeah.
so, I found it notable that you mentioned that some of your support is intrusive, meaning
Mhm.
that many of your students, given their life circumstances, will come with various challenges and deficits that need to be overcome if they're going to complete, if the
Yeah,
goal is completion. And so,
absolutely.
you know, how important is this concept of being, I would say, proactive rather than
Mhm.
reactive? Once the grades start sliding, once the class attendance start dipping
Mhm.
for students, what have you seen with regards to, I would say, the importance and the effectiveness of being intrusive, or I'd say
Mhm.
proactive, with regards to making sure students are supported as they make their journey through the institution?
Yeah. Yeah, it's essential. I mean, simply put, it's essential. And I would say that is true for all students today, and not just students from a challenged economic situation, not just students from a challenged family background, not just students from um, distance far away from campus. I mean, if really, honestly, all students, I think, really need that kind of support. And when we have prospective student events, I get to have the opportunity to welcome students and their guests, and I say to them, if you don't want to be known, then we're not the place for you. Like, we really get to know our students, and it is the way that we can proactively make sure that those students, one, keep their eye on the ball, that they realize that they're here for a reason, and that that reason is ultimately degree completion. And two, that the degree completion is so much more gratifying and successful when you really lean into the community. And three, we expect everyone to ask questions. Like, that starts on that journey for that first prospective student visit, and probably even before then. Like, we expect you to be active, engaged members of our community. And if you don't ask questions, we're going to worry about you. And so it's essential for all of our students. And I would say that um, not only, again, do they get a president who's first generation college student, college graduate, there are so many people in my community here who are first generation or come from immigrant families, or we're on our Riverdale campus, majority minority campus, and so many students of color. And to really have this really diverse, rich, authentically inclusive community, it doesn't matter where you come from, you're here now. And because you're here now and you're part of our community, we expect that you're going to ask for help. We expect that you're going to accept the help, even if you've not asked for it. And we really do want to walk with you in this journey. And when you say, no, I don't need help, then we're really going to ask, why not? And so I think all students really absolutely need that kind of intrusive. And I would say, if they don't think they need it, then I would say, then, gosh, let's teach them how to need it. Because I mean, you and I both could benefit from somebody helping us. Why wouldn't we ask for it? And so modeling that behavior and encouraging that, taking advantage of the resources available, I think is really essential.
And talking about diversity, of course, you mentioned that the amount is majority minority. Um, of course, what we've noted and what we have seen is, nationwide, there really have been attacks against, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any proactive steps to ensure diversity. There are some challenges, maybe not in New York or New York City,
Yeah.
but certainly across the country.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could talk about efforts to foster, an inclusive environment. And I would ask this question specific to the faculty and staff that you hire, right? I was wondering if you could talk about, some of the steps that you've taken um, in your tenure to really make, DEI something that is, perhaps a way of life at your institution.
Yeah, I am so fortunate to have entered a community where, again, it's in our DNA. And it is a very different experience in New York City. So I will tell you that I'm a Midwesterner, born and raised. I'm originally from Kansas. I spent 19 years in Iowa before I moved to New York City specifically for this position, and to serve this incredible community that I am blessed to serve. And I will say that I hear you absolutely, that this is not something embraced across the country, and even more so in this moment is being challenged. I have colleagues back in Iowa who are saying, I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen in context of our efforts to really be authentically inclusive institutions. And does that put us in a situation where we might be challenged or at risk of losing funding or whatever? And so it's not lost on me that where I'm at and the experience I'm having here is very different than some other colleagues in different parts of the country. So again, by our founding, we have embraced diversity, equity, and authentic inclusion. And I would even take it further and say that we're in our DNA of an institution, we're very much focused on belonging and very much focused on the care for common humanity. Our mission statement talks about our respect for human dignity, our care for common humanity, and our obligations to each other. That literally is in our mission statement. And so it is really very much in the fabric of who we are. And it's lived out in so many different beautiful ways. I'm going to talk a little about the community, and then I will answer your question specifically about our hiring practices and what we've tried to do over the past 4 years that I've been here. So University of Mount St. Vincent, I describe as a complex learning portfolio of different kinds of learners. So our total enrollment's about 3,800, a little over 3,800. And that is made up of traditional undergraduate students, our associate degree students. It's made up of graduate students, both in person and online. And then we also have a pathway to the University of Mount St. Vincent degree, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, through a partnership that we have with an Orthodox Jewish seminary, where we are educating women in Brooklyn who are probably never going to step foot on our campus, on our Riverdale campus in the Bronx. They'd be welcome, of course, but they're in Brooklyn, and we educate them in a very culturally sensitive way as well. Obviously, as an institution that is religious affiliated, we see the value of faith and reason as we educate our students, and so we have a beautiful partnership with those students. When you walk onto our campus or step onto our campus, we've got this beautiful 70 acres right on the Hudson River, and it is truly a community that welcomes all. And I think that's why we have seen continued growth for a moment, I'm going to focus on racial and ethnic diversity. So on our campus here in Riverdale, any given day, you'd see about 1,700 to 1,800 students in person on our campus. And we're a Hispanic-serving institution, a minority-serving institution, and again, on our campus, majority minority. And really, again, we so beautifully see people for who they are as people. And we are interested in supporting those dreams, whatever those dreams may be, whether they've fully formed them or not, and give space for people to fully become who they are called to be. We also have a program on our campus. It's called the Bridge Program for college-age adults who have differing learning abilities or differing intellectual abilities, where they can come on our campus, live on campus if they choose to do so. They take classes that are specifically designed for them, that are about life skills, about relationships, about finances. And so in that program, it's a small program, about 20 students. Many of them are on the autism spectrum. We have some of them who have Down syndrome and other intellectual differing abilities. And this community so beautifully wraps around those students. So students do internships on campus. Last year, our homecoming queen was one of our students from the Bridge Program. They often compete in our talent show and win. And they also are members just in the fabric of the community. And so I could be hard pressed to see us not just living that mission and values and really authentic inclusivity. In terms of hiring practices, and specifically in hiring of faculty, staff, and administrators, it's been an absolute high priority for the institution since before I arrived, to make sure that our employees reflect the community in which they serve. And I will also say, and that is easier said than done because of the systemic racism that it abounds in so many different ways throughout higher education and beyond higher education. Our faculty, my percentage of faculty of color is not the same percentage of my students of color on this campus, but it has increased in the time that I've been here. We've also, and I would say how we've made it a priority is that in our strategic plan that we are actually coming to conclusion with in the year 2025, we've said from the Board of Trustees to the student to the employee, this community really should reflect who we want to support and serve to give access to quality educational experiences. And so it's been a priority from the board that we continue to make sure that we have rich diversity that represents the community in which we are blessed to serve. So it's been a priority in hiring practices. How do we do that? Part of it is authentically showing who we are. And so making sure that as we advertise positions, we talk about who we are, who we support and serve, how we are embracing of DEIB and justice, and really telling the story of the Mount. It's about, this sounds silly but true, it's about word of mouth in that hiring process as well, making sure that we're using our networks of access to diverse communities as we recruit employees. And I think really that has been, in some respects, easier on the staff side than the faculty side, just because, again, there are challenges in that space. But the other thing that I would say too, we're not an institution that's been cutting programs. We're not an institution that's been cutting positions. And so I think we are, sad but true, benefiting right now in this moment of other institutions cutting back and dismissing DEIB. And we're a home that it fully embraces that. And so I think that that's been part of our continued success as well. And that's not a way to success that I like to see, because I want other institutions to embrace this as well. But we're still an institution that's hiring. We're still an institution that are adding programs like Seton College, which you can see gives a clear commitment to embracing authentically inclusion.
Interesting. You spoke about the Mount perhaps benefiting from other institutions, who may be struggling to continue certain programs. And of course, you mentioned coming from the Midwest, your background is varied. You've been in a number of different places and number of different climates. It is a struggle for many of your colleagues in higher education leadership, to really, even if they personally want to champion DEIB, they feel constrained. If they're public institutions, they're dealing with legislatures and policymakers who are not supportive, and they are facing headwinds all around that everybody faces. For instance, when it comes to diversifying faculty and staff, but it's even the crisis is even more acute in certain places that other states where DEI is opposed more vigorously. And so I was wondering if you could just talk about any tips for success, any advice that you would give some of our listeners, who see the value of DEIB, may hear and observe that enrollment has increased. It looks like things have progressed quite nicely on your tenure. They see the value, but they don't see how to do it. Any advice for some of your colleagues who may be listening on what they can do despite their context to support DEIB?
Yeah, no, I think that if I had the magic wand, I would wave it and it wouldn't be a conversation we'd have to have. But it is very real. And I do really think about and feel for my colleagues back in Iowa, because there are so many institutions that are really kind of struggling with this. How do we have the conversation? Now, I came from, specifically while I was in Iowa, private higher education. And so we had a little bit more flexibility in what we could say and not worry about losing state funding. And at the same time, many of our students there received the Iowa tuition grant, which was to help offset the costs of private higher education, which was state funded. And there were conversations even when I was there 4 years ago about how that funding was going to continue and if there were going to be contingencies put on that funding for private higher education for students seeking private higher education. And my advice would be, and I have had these conversations with colleagues at public institutions as well, go back to the reason why you were founded and really look at what were those original intents, desires, purpose, charter, and language used in the context to access to education. Many land grant institutions in the Midwest really were developed for access to education. And how is that continued or not continued? And what does that look like today? And who doesn't have access to education? And how are we going to support people who want to support that access to education? The thing that when I was in Iowa, I really had lots of conversations with colleagues. At the time, I was serving as the chief academic officer at a small Catholic university before I came to New York. with colleagues, I would talk about, okay, when we hire people of color, Dubuque, Iowa is not very much a community of color. And in fact, the city percentage, Dubuque, Iowa is, I can say this now living in New York City, it's very tiny, about 60,000 people. The percentage of color, people of color in that area when I was living there was about 9%. The university that I was at had about 36% students of color. And that seems like such a small percentage now. I'm at an institution that is a majority minority, but it didn't start at 36% when I was there. And so I said to the community, to my colleagues, to the faculty we were hiring, like, again, we want to reflect who we serve. Now, if I hire faculty into this community and I don't have the same percentage of faculty of color, then how are those faculty feeling like they have community? Because they're not going to find a community with students in the same way that I want them to feel like they have community of colleagues. And so my advice to colleagues at institutions that are in situations where there's not rich diversity is it's not enough. It's just like our students. It's not enough to recruit them. How are we retaining? So what are you intentionally doing in your community and beyond your campus to connect people to a community where they feel like they are home? And so we worked very diligently with partners in the community to make sure that when we had faculty who were interviewing, faculty who had accepted positions, to feel like they had a community outside of the campus, that they could see themselves to be a part of that community as well. And for the faculty, it was easy. And I talked to some of my colleagues at the time, they fully bought into what we were doing at the institution. They fully bought into the mission and values and the ways in which we supported and served. But they also very much had a human desire to feel like they were part of something more than just that campus. And I think that there are places across this country that fail at providing that kind of community to faculty colleagues, staff colleagues, administrative colleagues as well. And so my advice would be, again, go back to your charter, go back to your original mission. Why were you founded? And how do you talk about that in context of recruiting students today? My guess is that there is language beyond DEI, which I know is absolutely under attack, that talks about access to education for those who don't have access to education. And then talk about belonging. Belonging is a less threatening word. That's so strange to me, but it's a less that threatening word. And why wouldn't you want your students and colleagues to feel like they belong? Like any politician or person who says, no, I don't want people to belong, that's a different conversation than I don't want DEI. Well, okay, let's talk about belonging then. And how do we build community? So really reflecting on that, I think is very important for all of us institutions right now.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. My last question is with regards to the strategic planning process that is concluding at the University of Mount St. Vincent. I was wondering if you could just talk about some of the goals, what
Yeah.
you want to see the Mount become, your vision for the future. So let's talk about, just as a last question, the strategic planning process and some of the goals that you set out as you look at the future of the Mount.
Yeah. That's I just had a retreat with my senior administration team last week, and this was the conversation. So when I arrived at the university during the pandemic, so I arrived in office January of 2021, moved across the country, accepted a position at a place that I didn't step foot on campus before I accepted the position because my entire interview process was virtual during the pandemic, and that tells you something about how this place has such an ability to really make you feel like you want to be a part of it. And so that was exactly the experience that I had. But when I arrived, they actually had a strategic plan that was a 10-year plan that they put on a shelf and said, you know what, we've got other things we've got to focus on. And so let's just shelf it for now. And maybe we'll come back to it. And as I said to the board and I said to the community, I'm not a person who makes a plan and then sets it on a shelf. I'm a person who absolutely believes that you need to have goals to set direction that plan should be a living, breathing document that adapts with the opportunities and challenges as they arise. And so the plan that they had developed was 2015 to 2025. And so I said, let's not completely throw that plan away, but let's take that plan, look at the bones of it, and really ask the question of what's changed. Obviously, we're in a pandemic. What do we need to adjust? What is real? What is not real? And how do we make sure that we set a path for the remainder of this plan? So we brought together students, faculty, staff, administration, alumni, community partners to very quickly assess what we wanted to keep, revise what we wanted to revise, and be both ambitious but also realistic of what can we do in 3 years to get us to the 2025 date that we set ourselves on. And the community rallied together in such a beautiful way. And I think in that moment, we were really looking for, okay, we're navigating this pandemic, and we think we're doing all the things that we can do to not only continue to recruit students, but retain students and help them complete, to see the opportunities to continue on that path towards social mobility. We've been ranked #1 for social mobility in the past 2 years by U.S. News and World Reports. How can we continue that amidst all of this? And so the plan for me was about hope. And how do we continue to hope and look to the future? So in our current plan, we didn't talk about just, okay, we want to grow enrollment. Show me a strategic plan that doesn't want to grow enrollment in a university's plan. Of course, we wanted to grow enrollment, but we wanted to do it in strategic ways of partnership and opportunity to expand access to the education. I would say broadly, what we were doing then, what we do now, and what we'll do in the future is we meet learners when, where, and how they need us. And so in our plan, we talked about the growth of enrollment through our partnership, for example, with the Orthodox Jewish Seminary in Brooklyn. So when I arrived, that partnership had just really started getting going. We had maybe a few hundred students in that pathway at the undergraduate and graduate level. We now have over 1,200 students between undergraduate and graduate students in that pathway, that we are beautifully providing an excellent education for those women who are seeking to transform their lives and trajectory and the lives of their families and community. We, as an institution, had not done really any kind of online learning, and we were doing remote for that brief period of time when everybody had to go remote, but we knew that we could offer excellent education in online space. And so in the strategic plan, we grew our enrollments through launching fully online graduate programs. We were just having conversations this week about how we started in January of 20, think about this for a moment, 23, with those programs with about 30 students. We now have close to 400 students in those online programs. And so our continued growth, when I look to the future, it's not just about starting new programs. We started the first physician's assistant program in the Bronx, registered in the Bronx. And we've had now our first cohort graduate with that program. It's about asking, what does the community need? And what can we do to support that need? Not to be everyone to everything to everyone, but to really assess who we are and what we can do either by ourselves or in partnerships with others. Part of our strategic plan talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, living our mission, our values, and got very specific on how can we communicate who we are to an external audience. And so we did a full assessment of our marketing materials. We've done a full brand refresh. We became the University of Mount St. Vincent. We were College of Mount St. Vincent, became university. And that was absolutely part of the conversation in our materials and our brand refresh and the ways in which we tell our stories. And so we've done that beautifully. We've launched new initiatives like a Center for Leadership for our students, and really have provided access to this network of individuals across all kinds of different professions, because we find that many of our students don't have access to networks by their own family background or friend network. We provide that network through our Center for Leadership as well. And so we've really asked the question of, again, how can we meet learners when, where, and how they need us through enhanced modalities, through enriching the student experience, and through telling our story to our internal and external audience. Now, what do I imagine for the next? I would say it's not my vision to hold alone, quite honestly. And so part of what we're doing right now and what we'll do, we've got our Spring University Summit this week where we bring back all of our employees before classes start. Part of what we're going to be doing is talking about what's the headline for 2030. Who is the University of Mount St. Vincent in 2030? As we look to the future, what I imagine, I won't give you all the details, what I imagine is that we're an institution that continues to lean into our mission, values, and putting students at the center of what we do. And be that a student who is a traditional undergraduate student who wasn't sure that they'd go to college, but now are in Seton College, through the expansion of Seton College, through the expansion of the programs that we offer for our four-year students, but also through a very practical approach whereby students, regardless of the major that they choose, and we have the full array of liberal arts and sciences and professional programs, have the ability to say that they've had a career experience before they graduate to be prepared for whatever is next, whether it be for an adult learner who is looking to complete their degree, whether it be for us offering education online to students in other countries. So it's broadening that student access is going to be a large part of what we talk about in my and I'm hoping others' vision for 2030. But how do we continue to prioritize not just getting them here, but helping them complete? Because you and I both know that the worst situation we can have as a student walking away with no college and debt, and making sure that those students see the value of persisting to the end and see the opportunity of how their lives will be transformed because of that educational experience. So we've got lots of different things we're talking about, lots of things we're thinking about. And I would say that in the end of the day, it's about leaning into who we are and how we beautifully support all of our learners at the University of Mount St. Vincent.
Dr. Burns, I thank you so very much for joining us. It's a fascinating conversation. I know that our listeners will have much to gain from your words of wisdom. So I just want to say thank you again for joining us in the margins, and I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions you asked and the community that you build by having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burns. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.